When I was 13, I overheard my father having a quiet conversation with a friend during a family gathering. They were talking in hushed tones, and although I couldn't make out every word, one phrase stood out to me. Circumcision. At the time, I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I knew from the way they spoke that it was something important, maybe even personal. Years later, that word kept showing up. In locker rooms, on late-night forums, whispered between new parents, sometimes wrapped in science, sometimes tangled in culture or religion, and always met with one big question. Is it better to keep the foreskin or to remove it? It sounds like a simple question, but if you've ever asked it, really asked it, it's not that easy. It's not just about a piece of skin. It's about identity, about health, about pleasure, about doing what's right for you or for your child with confidence and peace of mind. So, in this video, we're going on a journey, not just through the facts, but through the stories, the science, and the real-life experiences that shape this conversation. We're going to explore what the foreskin actually does, why some choose to remove it, why others don't, and what modern medicine truly says about all of it. No judgment, no pressure, just clarity. Because when it comes to your body or your child's, you deserve more than quick answers or secondhand opinions. You deserve to understand. And maybe by the end of this video, you'll find your answer. Or, better yet, the courage to ask the right questions. So, stay with me. This is a story worth hearing. Let me tell you about Daniel. Daniel was in his mid-30s, a teacher father of 2 living a perfectly ordinary life. But during a routine checkup, his doctor brought up something he hadn't thought about since his early teens: his foreskin. Daniel had never been circumcised. He had no medical issues, no discomfort, nothing unusual. But that day, the doctor casually asked if he'd ever considered having it removed. It surprised him. Not because he hadn't heard of circumcision before, but because for the first time in his life, someone posed it to him as a personal choice, not just a cultural tradition or something parents decide when you're a baby. And that got him thinking, what exactly does the foreskin do, and why is it even there in the first place? Most of us grow up without ever really learning about it. It's often seen as something that either gets removed early on or something that's just there. But the truth is, the foreskin is far more than a flap of skin. It's a complex functional part of the male anatomy. From a biological point of view, it plays 3 key roles. First, it's a protector. The glans or head of the penis is extremely sensitive. The foreskin acts like a natural sheath, shielding it from constant friction against fabric from drying out and from environmental irritants. In a way, it's nature's own cover for one of the most delicate parts of the male body. Second, it helps maintain a balanced environment. Inside the foreskin, the skin is moist, warm, and slightly acidic conditions that help protect the tissue and keep it comfortable. It also plays a role in reducing the need for external lubrication during intimate moments. And third, something many don't realize, it's a sensory powerhouse. The inner surface of the foreskin is packed with thousands of fine-touch nerve endings. These are not just passive nerves. They respond to motion, to light pressure, to warmth. For many men, this adds a layer of sensation and pleasure that is subtle but deeply personal. Daniel didn't know any of that before. And I'll be honest, neither did I until I started digging deeper. It's easy to overlook something that's always been there. But once you understand the intricate design of the body, it's hard not to appreciate it. Whether or not someone chooses to keep or remove the foreskin, knowing its natural function is a powerful step toward informed choice. And that's the key here. Understanding before deciding. So, what happened to Daniel? Well, he didn't rush into anything. He took the time to learn. He spoke with a urologist, read the research, and weighed his priorities. And that's really what this is about. Not what you choose, but why you choose it. Which brings us to something equally important. While the foreskin has its natural benefits, there's a reason millions around the world choose to remove it voluntarily or otherwise. And many of those reasons have nothing to do with culture or tradition, but everything to do with health. So let's talk about that. Let's explore the science-backed reasons why circumcision isn't just a custom, but sometimes a serious medical recommendation, and in some cases, even a lifesaver. Let me take you now to a very different story. This one's about Malik, a father of a newborn baby boy. Malik grew up in a household where circumcision wasn't practiced. It was never discussed. So when his son was born, and the pediatrician gently asked, "Have you thought about circumcision?" he felt caught off guard. He wasn't sure what to say. He didn't want to follow a tradition blindly, but he also didn't want to ignore something that might protect his child. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Malik found himself scrolling through article after article. The more he read, the more surprised he became. Not because the information was new, but because it was so rarely talked about clearly, without judgment or agenda. One of the first things he discovered was about hygiene. When the foreskin is present, especially in young children or adults who aren't taught proper care, it can become a place where dead skin cells, moisture, and bacteria gather. This buildup is called smegma. While it's not dangerous in itself, it can lead to infections if it's not cleaned regularly. Malik imagined his little boy growing up running around with sticky fingers and dirty clothes and wondered, would he remember to clean that part properly? The second point hit even closer to home. Urinary tract infections. UTIs are far more common in uncircumcised infants, especially in the first year of life. And while many people think of UTIs as minor in babies, they can lead to high fevers and sometimes even kidney damage. That stat stayed with him all night. And then came the big one, sexually transmitted infections. Malik found solid, large-scale studies from Africa, Europe, and the US that showed circumcision could significantly reduce the risk of HIV transmission in heterosexual men. We're talking about a drop of up to 60%. The science was strong, published in top journals like The Lancet, and supported by the World Health Organization. It wasn't about promoting fear, but about understanding vulnerability. The inner surface of the foreskin is rich in immune cells, the very ones viruses like HIV target. Removing it removes one of the easiest entry points. The data didn't stop there. There were lower risks for HPV, which can lead to genital warts and even cervical cancer in female partners. Lower chances of genital herpes. Fewer cases of balanitis and phimosis. And yes, even a slightly lower lifetime risk of penile cancer, though rare. It's often linked to chronic inflammation and poor hygiene. By morning, Malik wasn't yet ready to decide, but he understood the health conversation in a whole new light. And here's the important lesson. Circumcision isn't a magic shield. It doesn't make anyone invincible. Safe sex, good hygiene, and regular checkups still matter always, but in some cases it lowers the baseline risk. It adds another layer of protection. And for some people, especially in communities with high infection rates or limited access to medical care, that can make a very real difference. For Malik, it wasn't just about facts anymore. It was about his son's future, about health responsibility and giving him the best shot at growing up strong and protected. But of course, every benefit has a cost. And while circumcision does offer advantages backed by science, it also comes with its own set of trade-offs, things many men don't learn about until after the fact. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Because no medical decision is complete without understanding the other side of the story. The risks, the side effects, the things we sometimes don't talk about enough. Let's take a deeper look. A few years ago, I met Thomas. He was in his early 40s, worked in IT, and had been married for over a decade. One evening over coffee out of nowhere, he shared something deeply personal. He said I got circumcised at 38. Not for medical reasons, not for religion. I just got tired of feeling like something was off. I thought it would help. At first, the procedure seemed straightforward. The recovery went smoothly. But a few months later, Thomas noticed something he didn't expect. During intimacy, things felt different. Not painful, not bad, just muted. He described it as trying to listen to your favorite song through a thick wall, You know the melody is still there, but it doesn't quite reach you the way it used to. Now, before we jump to conclusions, it's important to understand that experiences like Thomas's are not universal. Many circumcised men report full, satisfying sex lives with no noticeable change in sensation, but there are others like Thomas who quietly wonder if something subtle was lost. Let's break this down a bit. The foreskin isn't just skin. It contains thousands of fine-touch nerve endings, particularly in the ridged band and inner mucosal layer. These nerves are highly sensitive to light touch, warmth, movement, all of which play a part in arousal and pleasure. When the foreskin is removed, those nerve endings are lost. Additionally, the glands normally protected by the foreskin becomes exposed to constant friction from clothing. Over time, this exposure leads to a process called keratinization, where the skin thickens slightly. While this helps protect the tissue, it can also reduce sensitivity. But this isn't just about biology. It's about perception, memory, intimacy. It's about how a person relates to their own body and to their partner. For some, there's no real shift. For others, like Thomas, there's a quiet adjustment, one that no one warned them about. And that brings us to a very human truth. Pleasure is deeply personal. What feels good, what matters most, how our bodies respond, these things are shaped by more than nerves. They're shaped by trust, by comfort, by confidence. And no scientific study can fully measure those things. So, what's the lesson here? Before making any decision that permanently alters your body, take the time to understand both sides. The gains, the losses, the maybes. Especially when it comes to something as intimate and personal as sexual sensation. Thomas didn't regret his decision, but he did wish he had known more beforehand. He wished someone had told him not just about the benefits, but about the gray areas. The things you only realize once you're living with the change. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation. Because now that we've talked about function, about protection, about pleasure, it's time we explore something many men don't even consider until it's too late. What happens when circumcision isn't a choice at all, but a medical necessity? When it's no longer a matter of culture or preference, but of urgent need? Let's talk about that next. There's something about pain in a private place that makes people silent. And that silence, it can last for years. I once spoke with a man named Jorge. He was in his late 50s, divorced, soft-spoken. For most of his adult life, he struggled with what he thought was just a sensitivity issue. Every time he tried to retract his foreskin, it felt tight, uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. Over time, he avoided intimacy. He avoided doctors. He avoided talking about it altogether. Until one night, the pain became impossible to ignore. After intimacy, he realized the foreskin had retracted and wouldn't return. The head of his penis began to swell. Within hours, it turned dark and sore. It was paraphimosis, a condition where the retracted foreskin gets stuck behind the glands and starts cutting off circulation. He was rushed to the emergency room. That night, circumcision was no longer a conversation. It was the only option. Stories like Jorge's are far more common than most of us realize. They just don't often make it into everyday conversation. Let's break it down a bit. There are two major medical conditions where circumcision becomes more than a preference, it becomes a clear clinical recommendation. The first is phimosis, when the foreskin is too tight to be pulled back over the head of the penis. In some cases, this can be managed with creams or stretching techniques. But in more severe cases, especially when it causes infections, hygiene problems, or painful erections, circumcision becomes the definitive solution. The second is paraphimosis, the condition Jorge faced. It's less common but far more dangerous. It requires immediate medical attention. Without treatment, it can lead to tissue damage or even permanent complications. Then there's another group, men who experience chronic infections. Repeated bouts of balanitis, balanopistitis, or urinary tract infections that don't improve with hygiene or medication. In these cases, removing the foreskin helps eliminate the root cause. Now here's the thing. These situations don't always start with dramatic symptoms. Sometimes it's a small discomfort, a little irritation, something easy to brush off. But left untreated, they can grow into something much more serious. The lesson here is a gentle but firm one. Don't ignore your body. If something feels off, if there's pain, tightness, swelling, or repeated infections, speak to a doctor. Not Google, not an online forum. A real, qualified medical professional. Jorge told me later that he wished he'd said something 20 years earlier. Not because he regretted the surgery, but because he spent decades thinking he had to live with pain, that it was normal, that it was too personal to bring up. The truth is, your health is never something to be ashamed of. And no concern is too small if it affects your daily life, your comfort, or your confidence. And while we're talking about age, medical conditions, and long-term health, it's worth looking at how timing affects this decision too, because the experience of a newborn being circumcised is very different from an adult choosing surgery later in life. Let's explore that next. What happens when the decision isn't yours, but one you're making on behalf of someone far too small to understand? Hoy, ChatGPT. A few months ago, I met a young couple, Sarah and Michael. They had just welcomed their first child, a baby boy named Elias. They were glowing with joy, sleep-deprived, but blissful. And then during a routine pediatric visit came a question they hadn't really prepared for. "Have you thought about circumcision?" Sarah looked at Michael. Michael looked at the floor. Neither of them had a clear answer. It wasn't something they'd discussed before. Suddenly, this tiny decision about a tiny body felt overwhelmingly big. And that's the truth for many new parents. You're handed this perfect, fragile little human, and you're expected to make decisions that could affect him for the rest of his life. Without a manual. Without enough time. And often without knowing what really matters. So, let's take a closer look. Circumcising a baby is a very different experience from circumcising an adult. For one, the procedure is usually quicker and the healing time much faster. Babies are resilient, and within a week or so, most are back to normal feeding, sleeping, kicking around like nothing happened. But it's not just about recovery. The real difference lies in consent and awareness. Adults choose for themselves. Infants don't. And that's where things get complicated. Some parents choose circumcision at birth for cultural or religious reasons. It's a long-standing tradition passed down through generations. Others make the choice for hygiene or perceived health benefits, thinking it might prevent issues later in life. And then there are parents like Sarah and Michael who simply want to do what's best, but feel stuck between conflicting voices. They read that circumcision might reduce the risk of certain infections, but also hear that many medical organizations don't recommend routine circumcision for all infants. They talk to friends who are firmly on one side or the other. They scroll through parenting forums full of passionate opinions and come out even more confused. So, what did they do? They paused. They breathed. They asked their pediatrician the tough questions. And they reminded themselves of one essential truth, whatever they decided it needed to be, from a place of care, not fear. In the end, they chose to wait. Not forever. Just until they had more information. Until they felt sure. And that decision, in itself, was powerful. The takeaway here is simple, but profound. When you're making a decision for someone who can't speak, yet speak with all the love and thoughtfulness you have, don't rush, don't react to pressure. Whether you choose circumcision or not, make sure it comes from understanding, not assumption. Because this isn't just about a procedure, it's about respect, about starting your child's life with choices rooted in intention. Now, as that child grows, hygiene becomes a part of the journey too, and many parents and even adult men find themselves wondering, can you maintain proper hygiene without circumcision, or is surgery the only way to stay clean and healthy? That's what we'll explore next. Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire conversation, how to care for the foreskin properly and why good hygiene might change the whole equation. Not long ago, I received a message from a viewer named Adam. He was 27, single, and shared something he had never told anyone before. He said, "I've never been circumcised, and honestly, I feel embarrassed. Not because of how I look, but because I'm not sure I'm doing things right. I wash, but I still worry. What if I'm missing something? What if someone notices? It struck me how common that quiet fear is. Many men, especially those who weren't taught how to properly care for themselves during adolescence, live with the silent worry that they're doing it wrong. Let's set the record straight. Having a foreskin doesn't mean you're unhygienic, but it does mean you need to know how to clean properly. And unfortunately, that's something few of us are ever really taught. Here's what's important. For someone with a retractable foreskin, the process is simple. Gently pull it back. Rinse the area beneath with warm water. Avoid harsh soaps. Dry thoroughly. That's it. It takes less than a minute, and it's one of the best habits a man can build into his daily routine. But for some, especially younger boys, the foreskin isn't fully retractable yet, and that's perfectly normal. In such cases, you don't force it. Over time, as the body matures, retraction becomes easier. Until then, cleaning the outer area and letting nature take its course is often enough. The problem arises when the lack of education leads to buildup of smegma moisture and bacteria. This can cause odor discomfort and in some cases infections. But again, the issue isn't the foreskin itself, it's the lack of guidance. I once spoke with a father, Chris, who said I never thought I'd have to teach my son how to clean that part of his body, but I realized if I don't, who will? That moment changed everything for him and for his son. And here's the deeper lesson. Hygiene is not just about staying clean. It's about feeling confident in your own body. It's about removing anxiety from intimacy, from relationships, from simply being yourself. For men like Adam, learning the proper care routine didn't just reduce his health concerns. It restored a quiet kind of pride, knowing that he was taking care of himself with intention, not fear. So if you're someone who's kept your foreskin, or if you're raising a son who will, the message is simple. Learn how to care for it properly. Teach it when the time comes. Because when you know what to do, the fear fades, and what's left is confidence. Of course, not everyone finds that confidence right away. For some men, the foreskin feels like a burden. They try the creams, they improve hygiene, they follow every tip, and still the infections come back. The irritation doesn't go away. The discomfort lingers. And in those cases, the conversation begins to shift. It's no longer just about choice or tradition. It becomes about quality of life. And that's where we go next. Let's talk about what it means when the foreskin, despite our best efforts, becomes more of a problem than a protector. And how to know when it might be time to consider another path. Let me introduce you to Nathan. He's 45 now, a carpenter from a small town, and one of the most straightforward men I've ever met. But when I asked him how long he had dealt with foreskin issues, he looked down and said quietly, "Over 15 years. 15 years. Of creams that didn't quite work. Of infections that came and went. Of uncomfortable intimacy, of having to explain and sometimes avoid it altogether. And worst of all, the feeling that it was just something he had to live with, something he was supposed to tough out. But pain has a way of catching up. And so last year, after yet another round of antibiotics, and one more infection that wouldn't clear, Nathan sat down with a urologist. For the first time, he asked all the questions he had been holding in, and for the first time, he heard something that made sense.
"You've done everything right," the doctor told him. "But at this point, circumcision may give you the relief that nothing else has."
It wasn't said with pressure, just clarity. That conversation changed Nathan's life. He decided to go through with the procedure not out of fear or frustration, but with a sense of readiness. A sense that he was finally making a decision for himself, not just reacting to symptoms. And afterward, he told me, "I wish I'd done it 10 years ago. I feel like my body is finally working with me, not against me." Nathan's story is one of many. Stories of men who tried everything, who learned and waited and hoped things would get better, and finally made a choice that brought peace. But here's the thing. This story could have gone the other way too, because not everyone needs circumcision. Not everyone who has a foreskin problem ends up in surgery. And not everyone who chooses circumcision ends up feeling better. That's why no one else can make the decision for you. Your anatomy is unique, your experience is personal, and your values, whether they come from your culture, your relationships, or your own sense of self, are part of that too. There's no universal right answer. There's only the right answer for you. So, if you're in the place Nathan once was, unsure, frustrated, quietly struggling, start by talking. Not to the internet, not to the loudest voice in the room, but to a doctor who will listen, to someone who will see you, not just your chart. And if you're a parent like Sarah and Michael making a decision on behalf of your child, the same principle applies. Start from love. Stay curious. Choose from knowledge, not noise, because the most powerful decisions are not the ones we make quickly. They're the ones we make with care. And speaking of care, there's one last thing we haven't touched on yet, something that matters deeply to so many men, regardless of foreskin status. It's the broader question of sexual health, of confidence, of strength, of performance, because for many men the concern doesn't end at the edge of the foreskin. It runs deeper. So before we wrap up, I want to share something that surprised even me, a natural, simple way to support male vitality that goes far beyond surgery or skin. Let's take a look. Let me tell you something that often goes unspoken. A lot of men who ask questions about circumcision, whether to keep it, whether to remove it, aren't just thinking about hygiene or infections or skin. They're thinking about something deeper, something harder to admit out loud. They're thinking about performance, about strength, about how their body responds, about how they feel in moments that matter most. I remember one message I received from a man named Leo. He had recently been circumcised in his early 50s after years of recurring issues. He said, "The surgery went fine, but afterwards, I still didn't feel like myself. I thought maybe once the problems were gone, everything would bounce back. But the truth is, I still didn't feel confident. It wasn't just about foreskin anymore. It was about energy, blood flow, sensitivity, desire, all the things that make a man feel alive in his own body. And the truth is, these things don't start or stop with circumcision. They're tied to so much more. Our diet, our circulation, our hormones, our stress, even our sleep." Leo began to look at the bigger picture. He changed his lifestyle slowly. He added morning walks. He cut back on sugar. And this surprised him most. He tried a short, simple breathing exercise he'd heard about online. Just 7 seconds a day, meant to improve pelvic blood flow and stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It sounded too easy to be real. But after a couple weeks, he noticed a shift. Not dramatic, but steady. He began waking up with morning erections again. His energy returned. His mood lifted. And maybe most importantly, his confidence did too. He told me what I learned was this: there isn't one fix. There's just a lot of small, quiet steps that slowly bring you back to yourself. And that's something I think more men need to hear. You are not broken. You're not alone. And you are not defined by a single procedure, a single decision, or a single moment of doubt. What matters most is that you keep listening to your body. Keep learning. Keep showing up for yourself. So, yes, circumcision is a deeply personal choice, one that can have medical, cultural, emotional, and physical dimensions. But it's only one piece of the larger puzzle of male health. And if that puzzle feels overwhelming, here's where you start. Just one question at a time. One conversation. One small act of care. Whether it's talking to your doctor, changing a habit, or simply deciding to know your body better, every step counts. Which brings us here to the final moment of this video. After all the science, the stories, the facts, and the feelings, what's the takeaway? Let's bring it all together. Let's wrap this up with clarity, compassion, and maybe even a little courage. So, here we are. After stories and science questions and quiet truths, what do we really know? Maybe the most important thing is this: there is no one-size-fits-all answer. There never was. Whether you decide to keep your foreskin or remove it, whether you're a parent deciding for your newborn or a man facing the choice later in life. The real power lies not in what you choose, but in why you choose it. Let me share one last story. A man named Sam, now in his late 60s, reached out after watching one of my older videos. He had never been circumcised and had never had any major issues. But all his life he felt unsure. Not because of pain or discomfort, but because he grew up thinking he was different, less clean, less normal. Only after hearing other men speak about their own doubts did he realize something simple and beautiful. His body had served him well. There was nothing wrong with it, nothing missing, nothing shameful. He told me I spent too many years wondering if I was the odd one out, but in the end I learned I was just me. And that was enough. That, to me, is the heart of this conversation. Whether your foreskin is part of you or not, your worth doesn't change. Your masculinity doesn't change. Your dignity, your health, your capacity to feel, to love, to enjoy life, they're not defined by a fold of skin. They never were. But knowledge, that does change things. When you understand your body, you treat it better. You speak up sooner. You live with more intention and less fear. So, if this video has helped you feel a little more informed, a little more at peace, then I'm grateful. That's why I made it. Not to persuade, not to argue, but to walk with you through a decision that's more personal than most people realize. And maybe now, with all the noise cleared away, you feel ready to take the next step. That might mean having a conversation with your doctor, or sitting down with your partner, or simply giving yourself the grace to think about it a little longer. Whatever you choose, let it be yours. And if you found this helpful, maybe someone else will too. Share it. Start a conversation that matters, because sometimes the questions we've been too shy to ask are the ones that bring us back home to ourselves. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and most of all, stay connected to yourself.